So this is our first webinar in this series, Flight Ops Regs, Air Transport and Small Aeroplanes and Aerial Work, our live information session. Very basically, starting from a strategic viewpoint, 2nd of December this year, the new CASARs will commence for flight operations in Australia, covering really two main areas, that is general operating and flight rules, which are covered under Part 91, which will impact to varying degrees almost everyone in the operations world of aviation in Australia. And the second thing about that, these new regs on the 2nd of December, is that we'll also cover the certification and management for a variety of aircraft and operations, everything from helicopters to large air transport and everything in between. So just moving on from that, and we look at exactly how this all fits together. We, I suppose, have to get used to hearing about all these numbers now, but essentially Part 91 are the general operating and flight rules, and they sit across the top of all of these regulations, and those rules apply to almost all operators in Australia. All these regs are interdependent, really, building blocks, and all operators, doing commercial operations will be operating under more than one part. If you are doing air transport type operations, which we split into 121 for large aeroplanes, 133 for rotorcraft, or 135 for the small aeroplane sector, they will come under CASAR Part 119, which really deals with the certification and management of those AOCs, or the AOC holders. For the aerial work people, they're kind of off to the side where they don't actually go through Part 119. Many of the Part 119 requirements are included actually in 138, but they just flow down from Part 91, which is the general operating and flight rules for everyone. So for example, 135, which is many of our audience here this afternoon, Part 91 sits on top. Part 119 is the management and the certification of your business, your aviation business, with regards to your AOC, and Part 135 is where you slot into the picture. And as I said earlier, Part 138 sort of out on its own, not really. It doesn't have to answer through to Part 119. They just flow down from the Part 91 general operating and flight rules. So really, I suppose the $64 question is what's required. What does CASA require of industry prior to the 2nd of December? Really, three main things, and we'll talk about these. First of all, your operations manual or exposition, either fully updated or for many people, most likely, probably at least in an interim version with annexes that describe how the new rules will be complied with by each of the operators. We also asked for a copy of any authorization or exemptions that were issued under the old legislation that you would like to continue using post 2nd of December. And finally, a declaration signed by the CEO of your organisation, essentially saying that you, to the best of your knowledge, that you will be complying with the new regulations after the 2nd of December, and you are using your best endeavours to do so. This CEO declaration is signed by the most senior person in the organisation, such as a CEO or managing director, and it basically commits that organisation to use their best endeavours to transition to those new rules as soon as possible, while of course maintaining safe operations. And this CEO declaration is not a huge separate piece of paper. It's actually included in the form that all operators will have to submit before the 2nd of December. It doesn't actually apply this specifically to balloon AOC holders. They're treated somewhat differently. So CASA's approach to all of these requirements that are due by the 2nd of December is that we won't be actually assessing or really approving your documents before commencement. We basically need to get that information into us, but we recognise that of course it is going to take some operators longer than others to go through that full transition process. And we're going to approach this from an attitude of a just culture, really, where we can see that if you are, or if any operator is making their best endeavours to comply, we'll certainly take a measured approach to our normal routine and risk-based surveillance activities, and we will do everything that we can to help you through that process. And we'll start with talking about that and perhaps elaborating on that later on this afternoon. So really, a step-by-step guide as to what operators have to send us by the 2nd of December. Well, first of all, include those new procedures that you have sent to us for aerial work passengers, if that applies to you, and management of change. And those procedures were due to be sent to us by the 5th of October, you may recall. If you decide to send us by the 2nd of December an interim manual with references to the old rules, with basically a statement explaining that those references should be now read as corresponding to the new rules. Review the key operational changes guides, and we'll talk about those later this arvo, and identify any changes that apply to you, and then update existing text or add any new text where needed. And we do have in these key changes guides large or pieces of selected text that you can put into your manual. Thirdly, provide CASA with a copy of any CASA issued instrument that you intend to use and complete that transition form. So be that as it may, these key operational guides that I've been talking about, they're actually on the website now. They're found just under our landing page in the new flight ops regs. They're key operational changes guides, and they show you what is changing and what you actually need to do. They do include, in many cases, some suggested text, or if there's no suggested text as such, at least some advice on how to amend your manual. They really are a good place for you to concentrate your efforts in the lead up to getting your manuals sorted and sent in to us by the 2nd of December. So for the rest of this presentation, before I hand over to our SMEs for some Q&A, we'll just have a look at what some of these suggested pieces of text or some of these requirements in the key changes guides might look like. And Tim McNamara, one of our SMEs, has included in the chat some of the links to these key changes guides. So thank you for that, Tim. So let's first of all take Part 91, for example. There's a key changes guide to Part 91. And as I said earlier, this impacts all industry. Everyone comes under some or all of the bits and pieces that are contained in Part 91. So for example, 91.310 is the regulation, and the title of that topic is an approach ban for IFR flights. And you think to yourself, well, what's all that about? Well, the requirement here is that, for example, this is just an example, at an aerodrome that has an air traffic service in operation and for which a runway visual range reports are available for instrument approach procedures to the relevant runway, the pilots in command must ensure that an approach to land is not conducted in the circumstances prescribed in that chapter 16 of the MOS. So let's just keep walking through this. What does it mean? Well, then, for this example, a typical operator, if the runway visual range is less than the landing minima, you can't descend below 1,000 feet on approach. But that only applies to aerodromes with a published runway visual range. The reason behind this is that basically it's a traffic congestion issue. It allows aircraft and crews that are qualified to fly low-vis approaches greater access to final approach to try and get in during bad weather. So that's the regulation, 91.310. So really, what do operators need to do? Well, look through this in the key changes guide, and there's no actual text that we require you to add to any ops manual or exposition. It really is just a reminder to flight crew. Operators should ensure that crews are conversant with the new requirement, and existing procedures may require at least some type of amendment. So what does the operator need to do? You might not have to, as I said, add anything to your manual. It really is just a flight crew matter, and they need to be advised of the change through notices to pilots or, at the next regular safety meeting, etc. And there are other resources such as the 91 MOS or the Plain English Guide for 91 that you can go to for further information. So that's just a small example of what a key change in Part 91 might look like. Let's go and have another look now at what a key change in Part 119 might look like. 119.225 talks about really personnel training and checking records. Okay, Part 119 affects all future air transport operators. Okay, so this isn't per se a requirement for 138. So not every change will require changes to text. Okay, but this requirement extends record keeping requirements related to flying experience, training, checking, etc. Tightens up on things like record keeping. So what does it mean in reality? It imposes more rigor around record keeping, and it's quite specific about what records that operators must keep under this new reg in 119. It's expanded to include not only aircrew, but all operational safety critical personnel. So in reality, we've actually put in some suggested text in the key changes guide. So have a read of that text, and I won't read it out there in its entirety, but if you're happy with that, you can put that into your manual as a way of complying with that new regulation under 119. Here's an example for 135, the air transport for small aeroplanes. 135, 120 really talks about and formalises the whole concept of sterile cockpits, for example. It's under the title of crew activities necessary for safe operation. So there are the requirements there. A new requirement for all operators operating under 135 to have sterile cockpit rules. Okay. So what does it mean? It's a simple means, of course, this whole sterile cockpit principle is to reduce distraction. It's left to the operator to decide if they have to adhere to the minimum in the regulation or not. So what do operators need to do? Well, for example, in this 135 key changes document, there's some sterile cockpit procedures that you can insert into your manual if that is what you if that is fit for purpose for your operation. You may already have a section on sterile cockpit procedures, and if that's the case, review the suggested text to see if it is appropriate or at least covers your circumstances, and then insert the CASA suggested text as amendment, or add any or all of that CASA suggested text and have a blended section. But all of these suggested pieces of text in our key changes documents are exactly that. They are suggested text. Operators are free to input their own text if there's another way that they would like to meet the intent of the new regulation. So the CASA suggested text does exceed the regulatory requirement, and it's framed like that in order, I suppose, for operators to be sure that they can comply. I mentioned earlier that it is not mandatory. And even though a suggested piece of text might be worded for a fixed wing operation, just by changing a couple of words, you can slot that in for a 133 operation, fixed wing versus rotary wing. But in the blue there, you can see on the slide that operators are free to amend and adjust that text as required, as long as the regulatory intent of the regulation is actually satisfied. So finally, let's just have a quick look at Part 138. Part 38 doesn't answer through to Part 119. They just come down really from Part 91. But many Part 138 provisions are roughly identical to a number of provisions that are currently existing in 119. So if you operate in Part 138 and as well conduct operations in Part 133 for rotorcraft, 135 for small aeroplanes, or 121 for large aeroplanes as well, we don't ask you to double up the same provisions. So you only have to mention the common provisions just once throughout your manual suite. And these documents are constructed as standalone. So if you just, for example, are an aerial work operator and you don't do any air transport, then only Part 91 and 138 will apply. With 138, there are some requirements that are going to be deferred post 2nd of December, but a lot of key changes to meet Part 138, for example, do not require any text, insert into your manuals. 138 really does cover a whole gambit or a large part of the bell curve of industry, from operations that are very low in complexity to very high complex operations. So it's not always easy to put in a generic piece of standard text for an aerial work operator, because the industry under 138 is just so diverse. But for example, it is likely that a lot of existing ops manuals for airwork operators may not have content relating to things like organisation and personnel, as might be required, for example, in 119. But it's likely that existing manuals already have some content on a lot of these operational topics. The best thing that operators can do over the coming days and weeks is to please make use of those key changes documents. Go through and find out what that suggested text is, and if you're happy with that and it meets your requirements, but it also meets the requirements of the regulation, insert that into your manuals. For example, let's look at our final example before I hand over. This is a 138 regulation, 138075, which looks at, what do we do, or what's our procedure if certain key personnel may be absent for some time, or absent, for example, here in for no longer than 35 days. How or why, or what are the requirements for substituting those personnel if they are absent from your organisation? Basically, you must now detail how absences of key personnel, such as your CEO or the head of operations, are actually managed. And 138075 places time limits for advising of CASA of absences and things of that nature. We've actually included some suggested text straight out of this key change document that you can have a read of, and if that is suitable for your purposes, you can insert that into your manual. That was a really quick, I suppose, Cook's tour as to some of the workings of these key change documents, whereby we have sections of suggested text that you can put into your manual suite prior to submission to CASA on or by the 2nd of December. And at least it gave people an outline, or at least another way of refreshing where they might sit under that regulation tree, which really cascades down from 91 through 119 if you're an air transport operator, or directly to 138 for aerial work. So we're about 20 or 25 minutes in, and I'm conscious of the fact that I want to at least allow a good hour for Q&A. So please, I'd like to now really hand over to our audience. They're really why we're here. So please hit that chat bubble on the top of the screen. And if you have any comments, questions, or seek any further clarification about what is required by the 2nd of December, or any of the artifacts that we have that may assist you in transitioning, please start typing them out. And as they come through, I'll read them out, and I'll flick those over to to our subject matter experts to address for you. If you are asking a question and you'd like to use your microphone just to elaborate on a specific part of that question, please don't be hesitant to jump on the microphone and address your question that way. Please be aware that after this webinar has concluded, we will be sending out to all people that have registered a series of useful links which will assist them, along this journey. And as I said before, all questions that we get this afternoon will be recorded, and any that we perhaps don't get answers to live on the webinar, we will certainly get back to those individuals, and also other people, everyone else that registered, an answer to that specific question. So while you're thinking of some questions or comments and bits and pieces that you'd like some assistance with, I just might throw to some of our SMEs. Just start off with some quick basic stuff. But Stuart's jumped in and has kicked off. Thank you, Stuart. Well done. What have we got here? Our first question. And it says, has CASA looked to update form number 375 compliance statement that can be used against the new regs and part numbers? So is there an SME, one of our SMEs could maybe jump in and just address that. Has CASA looked to update the form 375 compliance statement that can be used against the new regs and part numbers?
I can speak, Tim, if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Niels.
Hi, my name is Niels. I'm an inspector in Melbourne. We are working on a process, or a number of processes and sheets and assessment sheets to improve the way we assess review applications, if you will. I'm not sure where your what you'd like to get out of the particular form, because Form 375 is specifically used for initial applications. But we are working on a suite of worksheets that help with that specifically. We're also working on sample manuals, particularly in the sort of smaller aeroplane space and aerial workspace, as well as a sample table of contents, if you will, mapped out against the new regulations. This will be published hopefully shortly as an annex to AC 102 on how to develop and write operations manuals.
Okay, thanks, Niels. And you did mention in your reply there, Niels, that you mentioned, the $1 million question, the sample manuals, which are really there to assist organisations to meet that 2nd of June requirement for the submission of their final revised manual next year. Can one of the SMEs just give us a quick update as to a rough timeline as to when industry, in the 135 and 138 space anyway, expect to see some sample manuals on the street?
I can try to answer that question. I've written them, that they are written and they're ready for publication. Now we're going to go through a process within CASA to actually go through, make sure they are ready for publication. And that's where it sits at the moment. So they are ready to go. They just need to go through a process. And it's just a matter of priority. So that's how close they are to being published.
Okay. All right. So please keep typing in any questions, guys. I've got a few things just to get, a few questions here to get the ball rolling. Can
Tim, just before you go ahead with that, I'll just support Niels's comments there. I've added a link in the chat there for the person who was asking a question about the compliance statement. Also, for example, the landing page for Part 135, and each part has its own landing page with a wealth of resources available, applicable to that part. So I put up the Part 135 landing page in the chat, and below it a link to one of the resources, which is the mapping documents that may assist the inquiry in regards to mapping the regulations between each part. For example, this one I put up is mapping the links between Part 91, 119 and 135. Very useful document for operators to combine with the key operational changes document to identify areas of their manuals that they may wish to amend. As Neil said, the sample operations manuals will be coming out as well to support that. And the new, as Neil's alluded to, Form 375 is in relation to new AOC applicants. The new AOC application form is on the Flight Ops Regs page, and that also has a very brief version of a compliance statement as part of the form. So if a existing operator wanted to have a look at that, it might give them some useful information as well. But predominantly, if you go to the landing page associated with the part you're particularly interested in, you will find a wealth of information in the resource links that may answer most of your inquiries.
Okay. All right.
Tim, just Dale here. Hello, everyone. Just further to that, also in the resources for Part 138, there's the Part 138 sample operations manual for mustering, and also the guide to the sample operations manual. They're actually posted on the website now. And whilst they're focused on mustering, the actual administrative elements of the manual are quite adaptable to a reasonably simple or less complex aerial work operation across the board, and they may be helpful to people as well.
Thanks, Dale. Sean has written in a question regarding, the operational passenger seating capacity definition, which forms a large part of the break between 121 and 135, the large and small aircraft. Quite a hot topic at the moment. So I'll just very I'll just very deliberately go through Sean's question, and I'll ask one of the SMEs if they could come in and make some comment on that. Sean basically says, does all aircraft have 2 control seats? Under Sean's operation, I assume. And under our operations, a passenger can occupy a control seat. Does this make one of the control seats an operational passenger seat? So, for example, if you had an 11-seat multi-engine aircraft, the operational passenger seating capacity would essentially be 10. So further to that, if an operator's exposition stated that a passenger cannot occupy a control seat under any circumstances, would it follow then that this would drop the operational passenger seating capacity down to 9? So even though there would be no changes to the aircraft or aircraft configuration, it would mean that the aircraft would operate under Part 135 instead of 121, as the operational passenger seating capacity has now been reduced to not more than 9. Quite a hot topic, but if I could throw to one of the SMEs to respond to Sean's query there, please.
I'm happy to have a go at that one for you, Tim.
Thank you.
The answer is yes. Basically, the aircraft is now compliant with definition and compliance aspects of what is an maximum operational passenger seat configuration requirement, because it is something that's actually described in the operator's exposition. So the answer is yes. There are some issues at the moment around that seat break. As everybody knows, there's been some research being done into it. But from the perspective of the question as asked, that would work.
Okay. Sean, anything else that you would like to just jump on the microphone if you had any follow-up question to that one? No, all good. Okay, next question from Andrew up in Brisbane. We have an AOC, an Air Operator Certificate with a Beech 1900 and a King Air attached to it. If we wish to add our caravans, our Cessna 208 caravans to that AOC and take advantage of the seat break, so we don't need to pull out 3 seats, are we required to therefore use a Part 145 maintenance organisation for that? And Andrew makes the comment that the current information sheet is slightly ambiguous on this. Again, a hot topic right now among industry, but again, can I please throw to any of our SMEs to respond to that one?
That's a good question from Andrew. We don't actually have any of our maintenance specialists with us on this particular webinar because the focus wasn't on that area. But Andrew, unless one of the other panel members has some further information they could allude to, we will need to take that on notice, that question, and see if we can get an answer for you. We have staff dedicated to taking note of these questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as we have an answer on that question.
Okay.
Anyone else have anything they would like to add to Andrew's question about the 145 org? Yeah, no, we'll need to talk to our maintenance specialists to get an opinion in that regard, Andrew, but good question, and I know there's been plenty of people very interested in that answer, so we will certainly get back to you on that one.
Okay. And I noticed, Tim, thank you, you put down the sample ops manual for mustering on the chat, the link to that.
Yes, as Dale alluded to, that's until we get the other manuals approved through our internal process to actually publish, and as Neil's indicated earlier, that's coming very soon. These sample manuals will be particularly useful for organisations to have a wide variety of sample text that you could use, and also show you an example of the sort of structure you can use. But in the meantime, as Dale alluded to, the 138 manual can give you a very good idea of the sort of structure that we think works. But remember, of course, You're not limited to that by any means. It's just one way of describing how you manage your business. CASA is very open and flexible to information provided to us from organisations. You guys know how to run your business a lot better than we do, and you need to ensure that the manual works for you. That's the most important thing. You've got a document that you actually use, your staff use, and is a living, breathing description of how you manage your organisation. And that's the most important thing. So how you structure it and put it together is completely up to you. CASA just provides some suggestions and some useful resources to assist in that regard.
Thanks, Tim. And Stuart just replied, it's saying, thank you for your answers. Understood Form 375 was for new AOCs, but could still be used as a good checklist for requirements needed within your ops manual. Okay, what do we got? Scott, thank you for your question as I scroll down to this one. Scott says, are there any particular international approvals required for small aeroplane operators undertaking 138 aerial work activities outside territorial limits beyond 12 nautical miles, but actually taking off and landing in Australia without landing in another country, but still remaining within the respective Melbourne or Brisbane flight information regions? Okay, bit of a question from left field. Damien, can you respond to that? Thanks, mate.
I think it's Section 26 of the Civil Aviation Act requires permission from CASA to enter and exit Australia. The Part 138 certificate itself will include that permission. So specifically, no.
Okay. Scott has actually put in a supplementary question just in the last 30 seconds or so. Supplementary to this previous question, is this the same for large aeroplanes and rotorcraft conducting 138 operations? So does it matter with regards to size, I suppose, Damien?
No.
Okay. There you go. Short and sharp. So it doesn't matter with regards to aircraft size. Okay. Please keep questions coming in, guys. Anything that you would like to see clarification on, anything that's been, playing on your mind, for example, how we're going to deal with this type of stuff when the information comes into us. And actually further to that, can I just throw to the panel just to provide our audience with a bit of an update as to what will actually CASA do with this information when it lands on our desk?
Are you talking, Tim, particularly about the 2nd of December submissions?
Yes, mate. Yeah, when those submissions arrive into CASA by midnight on the 1st of December, what will CASA do with them and what's the process?
Well, the main thing that CASA will do initially is just to confirm that operators have actually provided a submission for the 2nd of December that includes the CEO declaration on the form. I can pop the form into the chat for you. That's primarily to make sure that you have had the opportunity to review your manuals and you've identified areas that may require amendment to comply with the new regulations, and you've submitted your form with your declaration and any copies of instruments. If you've done that and you've already complied with the 5th of October requirements, which were related to aerial work passengers, if you do use them, and also the management of change procedures, if you've already done that, then your organisation will automatically transition. You then, of course, have until the 2nd of June 2022 to complete your full amendment of your exposition and submit that. So what will CASA do is really just to confirm that you have made that submission. If you have, then you transition. It's as simple as that. From then on, of course, the surveillance aspect of CASA begins, and as Tim has already alluded to, CASA is going to be using a very measured and supportive approach in the surveillance phase to confirm that operators have actually been able to address the requirements to comply with the new regulations, and that's done over time between the 2nd of June 2022 and onwards. So CASA is very much taking a very supportive approach in this regard. We realise that it's a challenge initially to get your head around all of this, and it certainly is for us too. But we will work with you together to assist your organisations to meet the challenges of the new regulations and also the significant opportunities that they provide.
Thanks, Tim. And just confirm that there'll be no cost for this?
Yes, absolutely. There's no cost associated, no direct cost from CASA associated for doing all of this assessment work for your manuals. The only cost associated would be if you wanted to, as a result of doing a review, you wanted to add a capacity that you don't currently have. Of course, that would go under the normal costing arrangements. But as far as your existing organisation and the transition to the new regulations, certainly no cost associated with that.
Okay, thanks, Tim. That's great. And just talking about, the submission of things like ops manuals and expositions and all the rest of it, for a lot of operators, they probably are still trying to get their head around this new terminology of exposition. I know that it was a big part of the 141, 142 transition, but again, could one of our SMEs just jump on and very briefly just give a good explanation as to what do we actually mean by exposition and what might it look like?
Yes, well, Tim, an exposition really is just a fancy word for documents that you probably already have. But what it really is it depends on your organisation. If you're a small and simple organisation, your exposition could quite likely just be your operations manual. You may have other manuals associated with it. You might have a damp manual and all sorts of other manuals associated with your operation. So an exposition is just a collective term to encompass all of the material that you use in your business on a daily basis to manage it and run it. So it can be as simple as an operations manual, or it can encompass a whole suite of manuals depending on how complex your operation is. But it really is related to your organisation and to the way that you conduct your business.
All right, thank you, Tim. Hopefully that just cleared up that terminology. Question again from Sean. Thank you, Sean. Previously under CAR 174B, under our operation, we could operate single-engine piston aircraft at night under charter that did not involve the carrying of passengers. Under the new rules found in 135.235, it says VFR flights at night are limited to multi-engine or prescribed single-engine aircraft, PSEA. In reality, does this essentially eliminate our ability to fly single-engine piston aircraft at night, or are we still able to do this without passengers? Glenn, can you jump in for this one? Thanks, mate.
Yeah, so 135.235 is part of 135D7, which is passenger transport and medical transport. So this section does not apply to cargo-only operations. So it's one of those nuances of the way the new regs are written, but you need to go back from 135.235 up to the application of Division D7, which is 135.225, which basically says this division only applies for passenger transport operation or a medical transport operation. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Glenn. That's good. Sean, I hope that provided some clarity for you. Stuart, thank you, Stuart. Talking about terminology here, I think CASA are using the term head of operations for many new parts. Yep, fine and beaut. However, confirm this is still the concept of chief pilot and the responsibilities listed under CAO 820. for multiple part numbers, some terminology words, or at least some sort of explanation on chief pilot, head of flying operations, head of operations, might be actually quite welcome. Can any of the SMEs just address that? Confirm that the term head of operations is essentially the concept as we had already or have always known it as chief pilot.
Hi, Tim. Yes, that's it in a nutshell. For those operations that have had chief pilots or have chief pilots at present, of course.
Yep.
In the large end of the spectrum, they've been called head of flight operations for many years. So we're not changing that general relationship, you might say. It's just a new term. However, there are some experiential requirements within particularly the air transport provisions, which are new. And each of those has actually a separate exemption issued to it to allow an existing chief pilot, if you like, to continue on in the role of head of operations without any issues being entered into with respect to that. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Okay. Thanks for that, Dale. Stuart, I hope that was helpful. If there's any follow-up on that, Stuart, please just type that in and we can look at that further. Tim, in the meantime, you've put up a few extra links. What are they, Tim?
Oh, look, I just included the transition form for the submission for your CEO declaration as well. So that is the form that's required for the 1st of December. One of the questions earlier was what do we need to do? What will happen? So one of the things you need to do is complete that form, which has the CEO declaration on it as well. I've also included an AC that Neil's referred to earlier, AC 1-02, version 2 at the moment. Version 3 is coming out, and in that document will be some very useful information to assist with the development of your manuals. So that AC does describe in some detail how to put an exposition together in an operations manual. So you'll find that very useful when you're developing it. There are really four ACs to all the new flight ops regs, and they're AC 101, 102, and 103. They talk about the overall legislative concept, the transitional requirements, and also this guide for developing exposition. So certainly, if you want to get a big strategic view of the detail, their three ACs are definitely worth reading. Can I also just remind people, I'm sure you guys are already on top of all of this, but just a reminder, if you haven't done it for some time, it's definitely worth going on to the CASA subscribe list. I'll put a link on the chat very shortly for that. And just checking that you are subscribing to information that you're particularly interested in at the moment. From time to time, it's a good idea to update that. You may find you don't want some information, but you are particularly interested in some. And the Flight Ops Regs box to tick on that form is certainly a very good one to have, because there's a lot of new information coming out. And even these ACs, which are up to version 3 in many cases, and version 4 coming out. So if you're not receiving regular updates about the new material, then you're missing out on some very useful resources.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Khaled sent in a quick message. Thank you to CASA for putting this together. Oh, that's very nice to hear feedback like that. Quick one from Khaled. Would like to clarify that once we go through the transition to 135, will AOC holders who also conduct aerial work, will they be issued with a separate 138 certificate? And furthermore, will they be required to complete a separate application form?
The application form actually includes all the types of operations that you may be wishing to conduct. So if you have a look at that link I just put up a bit further up in the chat, the submission form, you'll see that that is a form that encompasses not only new ASC applications, but also detail about your particular organisation for transition. As far as a certificate, certainly Dale probably answered this question better than I could, but you'd be getting certainly in a 138 perspective, be getting an area work certificate as well. Is that your understanding, Dale? That would be two separate documents, or?
From the ops implementation perspective, when a certificate is issued or certificates are issued, yes, there'll be two separate documents, I believe. But from the point of view of the actual transition on the 2nd of December, these are deemed provisions. So it's I'm just referring to the implementation policy at the moment, and I don't believe there's any new certificate needed to be issued. Damien might confirm that for me, and because of the deeming provisions, until your other certificates start to run out, or you ask for something new.
Yeah, but definitely that's the case. You won't be getting anything on the 2nd of December. It'll be dependent on when your current approvals expire. One of the reasons why we want to see what instruments you wish to continue to utilise after the 2nd of December is to ensure that we make sure we provide you with the correct authorisations when they're due.
All right, thanks guys. Sorry about the flicking of the screen there. I lost the presentation for a sec. Stuart has a quick question talking about certificates. When an updated AOC certificate, or when are updated AOC certificates and airwork certificates, when are they expected to be released after we submit our manuals? Will the release wait until the current AOC certificate expires?
Tim, I can probably help you with that now. I found the reference. It's in section 5 of the transitional policy on the website, on the landing page for each part. And effectively, 513, existing AOC holders do not need to have their AOC reissued prior to transition. They will go through the normal renewal process to receive a new AOC or certificate upon AOC renewal date, or with the approval of the first significant change after the implementation date.
Okay.
So that's basically the policy there for you.
Okay, thanks for that question, Stuart. And I noticed that Tim did put on the link there for the subscription. Yeah, the flight ops reg box is a really good box to tick. Just don't make sure you don't tick too many boxes, because the last thing you want is, airworthiness directives for Rolls-Royce engines and things like that. If that doesn't apply to you, you can get inundated. But that flight ops regs box is a good box to tick. And also, Tim, you put on there some transitional stuff.
Yes, that's what Dar was talking about in relation. Cool. That's a very useful document to read in association with AC 103, which is on the transitional policy. This document actually helps organisations understand what actually happens to their business when it's transitioned and what they can expect. And that's what Dale was referring to for that previous question, which is another good question to ask. Okay.
Look, one of the questions we often get asked by operators is, this beast that we have to submit by the 2nd of December. For all intents and purposes, what does an interim ops manual or exposition actually look like? Can you maybe just shed some light on, what should it really look like?
Well, that's a very difficult question, Tim, because the first thing is that CASA doesn't want to dictate to an organisation what their manual should look like. What it should look like is something that they actually want to use.
Yep.
And we all know that some organisations would probably produce some material simply to comply with a requirement, and others will take the opportunity to ensure that they clearly document how they conduct their business. This is good for lots of reasons. It's certainly good from an aviation safety perspective, but it's also very good for all sorts of other reasons to be able to demonstrate whenever required to a variety of different sources how you do something. if you are ever required to justify how and why you do something, if it's documented, it's a lot easier to show and a lot easier to demonstrate. If it's just, oh, well, that's how we've always done it, or that's how everyone sort of gets the idea, it's all word of mouth, then it's a bit hard to demonstrate formally that you do conduct something of a particular way. But if it's written down and it's clear, then it's much less likely that things will be misunderstood. So getting back to your original question, what does a manual look like? Well, I'll tell you personally what I like to see when I visit an organisation and have a chat to them about how they conduct their operations. What I like to see is a very well-worn manual, a manual that's actually used, not one that's dusty in a cupboard or sitting under the computer screen to lift it up to high enough so they can actually read the screen, but a document that's actually used. Now, of course, a lot of organisations use electronic documents now, but an organisation that uses its manual regularly to help their staff and each other understand exactly how things are done. Now, when you do things regularly, it's relatively easy to remember how things are done, but if you do things from time to time, you may need to pull the manual out and refresh yourself. Well, how do we do this again? Or what's the most important aspects of this particular procedure we need to take care of today for this particular situation? So well-worn, what a manual looks like is a well-worn document that is well referred to and is updated regularly, and is the staff have a vested interest in ensuring that it's accurate, because they have to comply with it. And if it's not working for them, or it's not working for you as the business owner, then it needs to be amended. And that's what CASA loves to see, is an organisation that actively keeps their manual up to date and relevant. Because if it isn't, there's no point in having it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tim. Look, at the moment, we're just clicking over to 3 o'clock Eastern, so we've still got another 30 minutes or so for people to type in any questions or queries or seek clarification of anything to do with the flight ops regs. So please take this opportunity to pick the brains of our SMEs. If there's anything that you'd like to find out, or if there's any further information that you'd like some clarification on, please don't be shy in coming forward. So please make use of that meeting chat. The other place I can point you to in the meantime is the landing page for our flight ops regs on the CASA website. And while people are hopefully typing in a few extra questions, I'll see if I can just drag that website up. And if you just bear with me, just confirming.
I've got it there, Tim. I'll just pop it in for you.
Yeah, so can you see that screen now? The CASA website?
Yeah, that's come up.
Yeah, so the flight ops regs is on the landing page. You click on there, and the first thing you'll see is a link to those key operational changes guides and the step-by-step transition guide. That is that's a good place for people to head to at the outset. You can see that document there, that diagram there that I spoke about during the presentation earlier. Okay, and there's the various landing pages for all the various parts. Okay, forms and whatnot, ACs, quick reference, all those types of things that we have been speaking about, that we had been speaking about earlier. So if we look at these key operational changes guides, which are a really important piece of information as we head towards the 2nd of December. Okay, there's a bit of an intro, how to use the guides, what to actually do with the guides, who they apply to, what to do next. Included in that what to do next is that transition form, which includes that declaration that needs to be signed by that senior person within your organisation, committing them to using their best endeavours to transition to the new rules as soon as possible while maintaining safe operations, of course. Okay, so there are the key operational changes guides. So let's, for example, dump onto part 135 here. So we'll open that. and it's certainly worth a read. And as I said before, it not only includes suggested text where required, but also a heap of other information. And it's all color coded. For example, brand new requirements, administrative changes, requirements covering existing rule topics, and it's basically listed listed by reg number, the title, who it applies to, etc. Okay, and you can, as you go down there, you can just basically go down bit by bit by bit. Okay, so that's the key operational changes guide that you can see there, and there's one for all of those parts: 91, 119, 135, 138, etc. Okay, so yeah, look, I can't emphasize enough the importance of just jumping onto our Flight Ops Regs webpage to have a good look as to the information that we have there. Okay, there's a step-by-step transition guide as well. Step 1, which hopefully everyone has now passed through, which was the 5th of October, requirements for notification of airwork passengers if applicable and management of change. What we're doing now is step 2 and step 3, and resources, etc. So certainly some very useful stuff there that I can highly recommend that you jump onto. So let me just go back to our presentation. So please, guys, we've got 25 minutes left. If we have to, if there are no further questions and everyone's reasonably satisfied with the information that they received this afternoon, then we can call it quits early. Stuart, I can see, has put in another question, so I'll just wait till this thing pops up. Okay, Stuart, what do we got here? Has there been any progress on the newly proposed Part 43 maintenance for airwork aircraft? Drafting of the Part 43 legislation has been temporarily delayed due to the need to prioritise drafting of other regs and to support the flight ops parts. Okay, any of the SMEs want to just elaborate on that? But basically, we're fighting for legislative drafting space with a lot of other government departments, and our priority at the moment is getting the flight ops regs over the hurdle. And I understand from the latest info I have that Part 43 will begin the drafting process later in the year. Has anyone got any more info on that? No, all good. Okay. Handing over to any of the SMEs, any kind of final messages while we have a bit of time that you'd just like to convey at this stage, guys?
Tim, I think it's just I really appreciate people taking the time to come and visit us today and have an opportunity to pose their questions. I just want to reiterate that the submission required for the 2nd of December is very much aligned to helping you begin the process of your manual review and amendment. And really what we're looking for is just to ensure that you've had the opportunity to begin that review and send us what you've done, including your transition form and your instruments you wish to rely on, and then we'll let you get back to business and concentrate on developing the further content of your complete manual in time for your 2nd of June submission. So we're trying to make it as less onerous as possible for December, cognizant of the fact that it's been a very challenging year for everybody.
Yeah.
We have implemented new regulations, and we do want organisations to take a little bit of time to review their manuals, but we're trying to provide you with some useful tools to help you identify the key areas that we'd like you to concentrate on, and then you can continue to complete the full process during the first half of next year. As our Director of Aviation Safety, Pip Spencer, said, you can expect us to receive another letter quite soon in your mailbox directly from her, explaining her supportive approach to helping organisations transition to these new requirements. So I can just encourage organisations, get your submissions in, have your best go at putting together the information we've requested, and then we'll get back to you during next year to assist you further as you develop your full manual suite. In the meantime, you will receive from our organisation quite soon full copies of standard operations manuals and the expositions that you can utilise to help you understand what does CASA want and what does it look like. We had that question before. What does the ops manual look like, or what does the exposition look like? Well, we'll give you some examples of that. You can use as much or little of that as you like. But remember, the most important thing is whatever you submit to us needs to be something that you actually do. We're very interested in what you actually do and how you do it, and very supportive of helping you develop those materials if you have any questions in the meantime.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Tim. Just further to that, just before I let you go, I'll just go back to slide 9. That dot point number 2 is actually quite important, and I think there'll be many operators, especially the smaller operators, that may not be as well resourced as some of the larger operators. It'll probably be quite applicable for an interim manual, which we asked for by the start of December, with references to old rules. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Tim. Basically, add a statement explaining that those references should now be read as corresponding to new rules. That's really a minimum of what we may require by the 2nd of December. Just confirm that, Tim.
Well, that's one aspect, yes.
Yeah.
It's one of the aspects.
Yeah. Okay.
And then they can review their document, and using the key operational changes guides. Those guides, as we've said, have sample texts that give you a good understanding of what that particular regulation actually means in an operational context. And an organisation can then decide, is that relevant to me? Is that how I do it? Or change it, edit it so that it does actually reflect what you actually do. One of the most useful documents in this whole process that supports these guides that have just come out is the AMCGM material, and I can't advertise the benefit of this particular document enough. Each of the landing pages, as I said, for each part has a wealth of resources. One of the most useful is the AMCGM document, which is the acceptable means of compliance and guidance material. What that document does is take each one of the regs and explain the regulatory intent. I'll just put up 135s as an example for you to have a look, but each part has its own. And sometimes when you read a rule, because of the way the legislative drafting is conducted in Australia, sometimes it's not quite obvious straight away. What does that actually mean for me in my business? But the AMCGM should really help you understand the rule in more depth. So if you're struggling to understand what's this rule mean, that document may be particularly useful. Okay. I'll just pop that in the chat now.
Thank you. All right. Well, in the absence of any further questions or discussions, basically to wrap up this afternoon's webinar, please be aware that we're also holding webinars throughout this month of November on air transport aeroplanes, that is the large air transport world under 121, and also air transport rotorcraft and aerial work, because most rotorcraft operators usually have an aerial work certificate hanging in their foyer as well. I alluded to earlier that we'll send all people that registered for today an email after this session with links to what we largely spoke about this afternoon, and you can see the links that Tim has put down the right-hand side. And of course, the link will also include the email will also include a link to the obligatory short survey. If you can just spend a couple of minutes just giving your impression as to whether or not you found events like this of use. You know, is this one of the ways that you'd be happy to participate in Q&A sessions going forward? Obviously, with COVID this year, we had intended to get out and see people face to face in venues to have perhaps more in-depth discussions than we perhaps can over a video call. But with COVID playing havoc, we've gone down the video route. And yeah, if you can just let us know what you're thinking of with regards to how useful this type of concept is, that would be certainly appreciated. I think there's only one more slide, and yes, that is just to remind everyone, please, casa.gov.au/flight operations. That's where you will go through the gateway to all of those resources that Tim and Dale and Damien and Niels have been speaking about for the last hour or so. So without any further ado, I'll let everyone get back to what they do best, and we'll please feel free, if you wish, to log into further webinars as we go through the month. But stay in touch, jump onto flight operations, and we'll hopefully see you in the very near future. Thanks, everyone.